Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
The number one thing that people have trouble getting their head around with respect to networking and building relationships is it's not about what you get, it's about what you give. And I know that's counterintuitive because people embark on networking, people go out to events, people, do all sorts of stuff because they need to build a business. They just feel like, it just makes sense to get out there and ask for what you need. And the people who become really successful, and there are some really successful people out there, they just realize that, it's not about what I'm getting. If I just focus on giving, things will come to me. So in that spirit, I was on LinkedIn and ran across a gentleman by the name of Bob DePasquale, and he's known as the generosity guy. So I reached out to him cold and said, hey, can I get you to come on the podcast? And guess what? Bob is here. So welcome to the podcast, Bob.
Thanks for having me, man. Sure. You might want to call it a cold DM on LinkedIn, but I felt warm right away, man. So I'm happy to be here. Happy to talk about generosity and networking and building great business.
I guess what begs the question is kind of how you got the moniker, the generosity guy. If you want to kind of take us back a little bit.
Absolutely. The moniker itself is only a couple of years old, but I've been thinking, hopefully with a generous mind, for about 2 decades since I was a college student. Not that I was a selfish kid, but I didn't really think too much about the well-being of others when I was younger, especially since I'm an only child. I think my parents will tell you that. I was my own spoiled brat in some ways. But after the events that happened to me when I was just 18 years old, I'd be happy to get into them. But in short, yeah. I came with a new mindset, and I realized the importance of other people around us helping us, and how in life we're really made as humans, I believe, to support each other. And so over the past couple of decades, I've been kind of living that journey and learning about that. And then more recently, I've had the opportunity to speak with organizations about building generous cultures. And what I found, Frank, is that the more generous you are, and I don't necessarily mean just giving money or tangible gifts, but I mean giving other resources like time, intellectual property, resources from your business. If you can build those generous cultures, you're much more likely to grow as an organization.
No, as I indicated in the start, I firmly believe that it's counterintuitive. Mm-hmm. I didn't always live that. I was kind of the mindset that you go to work hard. It's eat or be eaten, kind of a way of thinking. And I worked for a big firm and then went into private practice. And when I went into private practice and was starting to ask for opinions, ask people for advice on what I should do, and we should reach out to other attorneys. And why would I want to do that? They're competitors, they don't want. I don't want them to know about me. And then quickly thereafter started to realize that, oh my gosh, these people are, and where it really started was, Bob, is I was in a court case. I was representing somebody in court and I lost bad. And I don't need to get into all the details, but I lost bad. I really messed something up. And the opposing counsel came up to me after all the dust was settled, the judges left and the clients are left. I'm feeling horrible. And he just said, you know what, let me help you out. And he referred me a book and he kind of walked through where I messed up. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe this guy's helping me. And in his mind, I don't know exactly what was going on in his mind, but my sense that in his mind, he's like, you know what, I just need to make the legal profession better. Where I was thinking, okay, he should just try and keep me down because I'm a competitor. But he didn't think that way.
Yeah, terrific story. And I can think a lot of those in my career. Or especially early on, where I was that young guy, wet behind the ears, trying to figure out the industry, made some mistakes, and other people who either noticed those or capitalized upon my mistakes really were more generous than I would ever expect them to be, especially after my career in broadcasting, which is another, chapter in my story. But the way that I got into my industry is, as a lot of people say these days, it was completely unexpected, but here I am. And now I've learned really some of those similar lessons to what you were just talking about.
Well, go ahead and please share a story if you've got one or two. That would be great.
Yeah, man, I got plenty of stories. So
Okay.
I'll be careful what you wish for, Frank.
All right.
So let me tell you about just the whole generosity concept in my life and why it's so meaningful. So when I was 18, I was headed off to college. Now, I don't know about you, or anyone listening out there, but when I was going off to college, I thought I was invincible. I was an 18-year-old kid,
Man.
nothing could take me down. And I was going to college for 3 reasons. One was to play football. Number 2 was to spend a little bit more time with my family. I grew up in South Florida, but I had moved there when I was 3, and I had an opportunity to go back to New York for school. And I thought, oh, cool, I'll get to spend more time with my aunts and uncles and cousins that I never see. And then somewhere on the list was getting an education. Now, maybe my parents would have hoped that the order of those 3 were flipped. But let's just say that I knew that I had to get an education too, and I'm glad that I did go to school. But while I was in training camp my freshman year, before the season started, getting ready to play football. Now, if you've ever, been a collegiate athlete and you go to a training camp or something when there's no students on the campus and it's just you, it's kind of boring. I mean, there's not a whole lot to do other than just practice and work on your craft and hang out with your teammates. But so it was the first week of training camp, and I'll never forget this. I came up lame with what I thought was a pulled groin muscle. Now, if you've ever pulled a groin muscle, so if you feel like you're invincible and then you pull a groin muscle, that's a shot to your ego right there, because I mean, you can't sit, stand, twist. I mean, it's a really awkward muscle that you don't realize that you use that much just in everyday life, let alone running down the field.
Right.
So I was not getting any better, and I would do these rehab exercises in this big training room. I mean, any given morning on a training camp morning, I mean, it's 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. There could be 100 people in this room between coaches and trainers and players and getting treatment before practice. So my rehab exercise was to sit on this 3-wheeled stool, and I would shimmy across the room. And I mean, I probably look like an idiot compared to everyone else getting like more serious treatments done. But one day the trainer calls me out. The head trainer, his name was Rick, really small guy. He stood on top of this box in the middle of the training room. And this is how he would get everyone's attention, because there was no like PA system or anything.
Right.
And he would scream and he yelled, he cups his hands like this. And he's like, Bobby, they called me Bobby back then. He's like, quit doing this silly exercise. You got to get back out on the field. You're being a weakling. And I'm like, the head trainer, this guy's calling me out in front of my new coaches and teammates. I felt like such a loser, man. It's like, I'm only doing the exercise you told me to do. Well, I tell you this whole story because over the period of the next week, he sent me to all these doctors because I told him, listen, I'm not getting any better, and this stupid exercise that you were making fun of me for is not working. So you better figure this out, tough guy. You're the big trainer at a college institution. So I was driving by myself. Now I'm 18, so I'm technically an adult. I felt so alone in these moments. I'm driving to these doctor's appointments and getting every test in the book, MRIs, CAT scans, ultrasound, sonogram, you name it, to figure out what's wrong with me. And on the day that my final appointment was, or at least what I thought was my final doctor's appointment, it was just a couple of days before what would have been my first game. Now, we knew I wasn't playing in the first game at this point, but there were 2 things happening on that day. 1, I had a doctor's appointment, and 2, my parents had been scheduled to fly up to New York, and they hadn't seen me in, over a month. And that was the longest I had ever been away from home. So I go to this doctor's appointment expecting to be there for hours, because all these other appointments would take at least half the day. I get into this appointment, and no sooner do I walk in the door, it's like they were just ready for me. It's like there was a camera and they knew I was walking in. I walk in the door, less than a minute later, bam, Robert, you're ready to go. And they called me, and I went right back into the office, and I sit down in the doctor's office there. And less than a minute later from that, he comes in, and I'm like, well, this has all happened kind of fast. He sits down, he looks me directly in the eye, and he goes, Bobby, you have cancer.
Oh, geez.
And I mean, my jaw hit the desk. Like, you just picture me like, what? I'm 18, I'm invincible, and I have a little groin injury, and I don't have cancer. And I don't even know if I said anything, Frank. I mean, I think I was just dead silent. And the only thing I remember him saying to me was, I know you're probably in shock. We'll hook you up with an oncologist. You're free to go. I mean, I felt like I was in jail. I'm like, I'm free to go. Like, what does that mean? Can you explain to me what's going on? So I walk out of that building totally confused. I mean, I wasn't sad. I wasn't frustrated. I was just like, I couldn't even believe it was happening. And the moment I left the building, I came right out of the sliding glass doors there, the automatic door, and it was like divine timing. My phone rang, and it was my mom. And she goes, oh, hey, I wasn't expecting you to be able to answer. I thought you'd still be in the appointment, but we landed and I'm in the car on the way to your uncle's house, which is where that they were going to be staying.
Right.
And she's like, but while I have you on the phone, how'd the appointment go? And I was like, about that appointment. And I mean, I had to tell her what the doctor said. And I can tell you, it was dead silent on the other end of the phone. But at the same time, it felt like my mom was just screaming. Like I could just tell her discomfort. And the only thing I remember hearing is my dad, who was in the other seat, in the back seat of this car. I could just hear him saying, Susan, Susan, which was my mom's name. He's like, what's going on? Like even he could tell something was going on based on my mom's reaction. And so we go back to my uncle's house, we meet. And I mean, I gave my parents a big hug and we shed some tears and said some prayers. And I'm like I said, I hadn't seen them in almost 2 months or a month and a half or whatever. And it was just like, I cannot believe this is even happening. So a couple of days go by and it was supposed to be the day of my first game. And obviously I wasn't at the game. It was an away game. And we're sitting there and we get a knock on the door at my uncle's house. And it's his best friend. Now, we don't know this guy because we live in Florida.
Right.
And he comes in the house. He says hi to my aunt and uncle. And we're thinking, okay, cool. And he walks directly over to my parents. And he says, Bob and Susan. He knows their names. I don't know how. I guess my uncle told him. He pulls his keys out of his pocket. And and it seemed like he was like shoving them in their face. And he was like, Bob, Susan, take my keys. You can have my car for as long as you need it. I can't imagine what you're going through with your son right now. And they said nothing. I mean, they were just looking at him like, what? And I thought to myself, wow, that's the most generous thing that someone's ever done for me and my family. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, who is this guy? So he was there for maybe 15 minutes. And he says goodbye to us, my aunt, uncle, and he leaves and he left. And he was gone. I'm like, to my uncle, I'm like, who is this guy? He's like, oh, that's Tim. You know, he's just a generous guy. I'm like, that's crazy. He just gave us his car. So thankfully we had the car. I was able to use it to go to another doctor's appointment on Monday. This is a couple of days later now. But on Tuesday, I went to my second ever college class. Now, my oncologist, who I had already spoken with, told me, don't drop out of all your classes. We got to figure out what we're going to do to treat you, but I don't want you to have nothing to do.
Right.
So I went to class. I come out and I was hungry. So I said, I'm going to go to the cafeteria. So I go to the cafeteria. I grab something. I think I was eating a breakfast burrito, nothing fancy. And I'm watching the news. Now, you remember those old school televisions that were like, and it's like 8 inches wide and it's sitting on a bracket in the corner of the ceiling in the wall.
Yep. You could have killed somebody. Yeah, totally. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm watching the news. And I don't know the news station in New York,
Right.
But whatever. I'm watching the news and I'm sitting there and all of a sudden a plane crashes into a building. And I'm like, wow, what a horrible accident. Like that's terrible. So I called my dad at that moment. I said, hey, you watching the news? He goes, yeah, I'm in the living room here at your uncle's house. And I just saw that plane. That's terrible. So we were talking for like a minute or so. And all of a sudden, bam, another plane hits the building right next to the other one that got hit. And we thought, this ain't an accident anymore.
Yeah.
And turned out that was the September 11th terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers there in Manhattan, which is not too far from where my school was.
Right.
So my dad says, all right, you better get back here because that was not an accident. So I sprinted out of, I don't know how with my groin injury. I was like, limping out of the cafeteria. that breakfast burrito must still be sitting there on the counter to this day, almost over 20 years later. And I got in the car. Now, typically it would take me 15 minutes to drive from school to my uncle's. But Frank, it took me 9 hours.
Wow.
And I'm watching the whole thing, like burning towers in the distance, inching my way down the highway. And will never, ever listen to 9 straight hours of AM radio again.
Right.
But it was riveting. I got all the way to my uncle's neighborhood and I ran out of gas. Thank God I didn't run out of gas on the highway, but we had to push my car into the driveway. And the key point of the whole story is right here. We had to push my car in the driveway, and my aunt was hysterical because she couldn't get a hold of my uncle. And he was on business the night before in Denver, thank God. And so he wasn't on one of those planes, but we thought he was. And finally, it's late at night, he calls and says, "Hey guys, I've been trying to get through. I know you're probably a wreck. I'm fine. I'm alive. I'm stuck in Denver. I couldn't get a flight back to New York. I'll try to get one in the morning, but I just wanted to let you know that I'm okay. And I love you guys." And we're like, oh, praise the Lord. And we're about to hang up. And he says, "But hang on, before I let you go, I just want to tell you that my friend Tim, who you all met just a couple of days ago, was in the towers this morning and he died."
Oh, geez.
And we're like, "What, you mean Tim? Like, 15 minutes, we just met him a couple of days." He worked for Cantor Fitzgerald, which is an investment firm and they had all their offices were in the towers, the North Tower there. And they were known for being really generous people, Frank.
What was Tim's last name?
O'Brien.
Okay. All right. Because I know
So you look
another
up Tim
Tim.
O'Brien.
Well, I knew another Tim who was in the Twin Towers who passed as well. Worked for Cantor Fitzgerald. So anyhow.
Wow. Well,
yeah, it could have been a very small world, but it's not. So that would have been wild.
They probably knew each other. Tim was a pretty well-known guy. And,
yeah. Well, if they were at work, that whole firm was gone.
Yep.
So anyhow, please continue. So
no, you're absolutely right. And I was going there. They lost everyone. Now, if you want to see one of the most emotional press conferences you'd ever see, the only person that didn't die from Cantor Fitzgerald that day was Howard Lutnick, who was the CEO, would typically be in the office, but for whatever reason that morning, he had to take his kids to school or something. His wife was sick or something happened. And he was one of those people that was like running down the side streets there after the building was hit. And so incredibly emotional. He lost everyone. Now, they were a generous organization, as I mentioned. They would donate office space to my uncle's foundation. My cousin has cystic fibrosis, which is a respiratory, autoimmune respiratory disease, affects your digestion, reproductive system, everything. Really tough disease. But my uncle started a foundation because of his son, my cousin. Well, they donated the office space to the foundation. Now, the only person who would typically be in the office that early at the foundation was also uncharacteristically late that morning, and she got stuck in the subway below. She ended up escaping, but the stories that she can tell are amazing and sad, but it makes you think, why would someone like her be spared? And I'm happy that Tammy is, that's her name, but Tim wasn't. And we'll never know that. But Tim used to have this saying, or there was a concept that would go around. You've heard of the term like FOMO, fear of missing out, or YOLO, you only live once. And nothing against those sayings, but the way that apparently Tim thought about it is that you never know when your last opportunity to be generous to someone will be. And it turns out that my family, and me specifically, was Tim's last opportunity to be generous, and he capitalized on it.
Wow.
So for me, it took a lot to take all that in back then. It took years to really, really think about it. But ever since that moment, I've thought about generosity differently.
I mean, that's just a powerful story right there. That's and I've often talked about 9/11 and how it really brought the best out in lots of people. And you kind of touched on it before, that we're really wired to help one another. We're wired to be generous. I think we get caught up in in quotas and trying to get the next best car, iPad, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's, it kind of gets in the way. It becomes a distraction. But our minds are conflicted. And it sounds like you've just been able to kind of push through that.
100%. And definitely pushed through for a while. I mean, I still had that, and I'm willing to talk more about the cancer and my treatments and everything. Obviously, I'm okay now, but I really was in a push through mindset. And I think there was something to be said for that. There was value in that I wasn't mentally overwhelmed as much as maybe some other patients might be. And my naivete maybe was good then, but it wasn't until later that I looked back and realized, including Tim, but a couple of the other forces in my life that really were extremely generous and ultimately saved my life. And the way that Tim modeled this, and I've had an opportunity now to speak to his kids who were kids, I mean, babies, like when this happened, and it was a terrible thing for his family. But the concept and idea of what you just talked about is key. I think humans are hardwired to be generous people. And I have another experience, or many other experiences that I can share about in my professional life that indicates this. The problem, though, is like what you also said, is the distractions. There's too many things in this world these days that tell us that we're not good enough, or we're not capable of being generous. But that doesn't eliminate the desire to actually be that way. And I feel like there's a lot of people in the world who have this desire to live out their generosity, but for whatever reason, they don't feel capable. And Tim and the other people like Cantor Fitzgerald, 20 plus years ago now, so the world was a little bit different, but I'm sure there were plenty of distractions back then too. They were able to rise above those, or leave aside those distractions and still be generous people, despite having an incredibly productive investment firm, which, I've been living it for 15 years now. I know how stressful that can be. So there's plenty of distractions in that world, but somehow they were able to still carve out the time and the energy to be generous.
That's a great story. Wow. If that's no, I love the story, and we're kind of running short on time. I want to shift gears here a little bit. Maybe we can get you back on another time.
Sure.
But I want to kind of focus in on your work, the generosity guy. You're out there, you're speaking, you're doing lots of things. If you could share about that and how people could get a hold of you, that would be awesome.
Terrific. Best place to get a hold of me, you can find most of my work at bobdipasquale.com. And there's just links to my socials. But really, the passion or the desire behind my work right now is to help people live out their generosity, and in many ways, not just as a Saturday morning activity for you and the family. Don't get me wrong, do it. Take your kids, model generosity with young people. It's critical that they learn these skills from when they're very, very young. But I also believe that generosity is good in business. And so part of the Generosity Guy's mission is to help organizations help people be more generous in their work. Help them go to work and not feel like they have to take down the person in the cubicle next to them. Create collaborative work environments that attract the most loyal customers, but also that attract the best talent so your organization can grow. And if you want more written information on that, I have what I call the G2 newsletter. G2 stands for Generosity and Growth. You can find links to that throughout my socials, or you can go to g2.bobdipasquale.com. And just for signing up for that, I have what I call the Generous Leaders Planner. It's a tremendous tool, pretty comprehensive, to help a leader who wants to start building a generous culture in their organization just get started. Completely no cost. Sign up for the newsletter. You'll get one of those. But most importantly, Frank, I really believe that the best organizations create environments that people just want to be a part of a good mission. So if you're a customer or you're a potential employee, a job seeker, you're going to look for the organizations that really care about people. I mean, it's just natural. So why not use that as a tremendous business tool?
Again, wonderful. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you. We'll have to get you back on.
Hey, anytime, Frank. Love having these conversations. I hope people out there listening have an opportunity to live out their generosity. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.